Because of Christianity's association with Judaism, Christians used many symbols and narrative representations from the Hebrew scriptures and other Jewish sources. There's almost no examples of specifically Christian art that exist before the early 3rd century. And even then, the art of these early Christians draws on styles and imagery from Jewish and classical traditions. And when I say classical traditions, I mean Roman and Greek. This process is known as syncretism. And syncretism is when artists assimilate images from other traditions, giving them new meaning. Borrowings can be unconscious or deliberate. They often invest standard images with symbolic meaning. So one of the examples is this Orient figure right here, Orient figure. These figures, and here's another one here. Actually, I'm sorry, this is the Good Shepherd, and right here are the figures that we're talking about here, these Orient figures. These figures have their arms stretched out in worship. They can be pagan, they can be Jewish, or they can be Christian, depending on the context in which they occur. This one is an example of Christianity. We know that because it's accompanied with this Good Shepherd. And I know it's kind of hard to make it out, but this is the shepherd here, and these are sheep here. The Good Shepherd is actually the most important of these syncretic images. In pagan art, the Good Shepherd is usually Apollo or Hermes, the shepherd, or Orpheus with animals. The one that we're looking at here depicts Hermes as the shepherd, and he was actually appointed by his half-brother Apollo after the theft and return of Apollo's sacred cattle herd to guard the sheep. And here, this is a late Roman copy of a Greek original from the 5th century BCE. So Christians take this symbolism of Hermes or of whatever deity protecting these sheep, and they use that as a metaphor for Christ and his sheep. So the Good Shepherd is the earliest way that Christ was depicted in art, and it's associated with Christ's flock of sheep. It's a metaphor for his followers. So Christ is the protective leader, and the sheep will follow him and love him. Also, Jesus is the shepherd who laid down his life for his sheep. So very strong metaphor there. Now, art has actually really played an important role in Christianity. The main reason is because the majority of people throughout most of time have been illiterate. That means they can't read the scriptures that are so important to Christianity. So art is able to communicate the basic concepts of the Christian religion, including the resurrection, the salvation, and life after death. So what we're just looking at was an example of very early Christian art. But there is imperial Christian architecture and art is the next topic we're going to talk about. In 313, Constantine I issues the Edict of Milan, granting all people in the Roman Empire religious freedom. Religious tolerance combined with Constantine's active support of Christianity allowed Christians to publicly develop and spread. Christianity evolved into a complex philosophical and ethical system that incorporated many ideas from Greek and Roman thought, including Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism. Now, architecture was needed for Christians because Christian worship is communal. Congregations needed large, well-lit spaces for their worship. Christians first gathered in homes of members of the community to worship together. But gradually, two forms of Christian churches developed in the 3rd century CE. That is the Basilica plan, which is sometimes called the longitudinal plan, and the central plan. The Basilica plan was based on the rectangular Roman basilicas, and it was characterized by an atrium, which is an open court that leads to the narex, which is a porch. So here we go here. Then we have the two doorways from that form the church's portal, and leading to the long central area called the nave. So doorways here, and then this is the nave through here. They usually had high ceilings for the nave, and it separated the nave from the aisle. So this high ceiling is the nave, and then over here would be the side aisles. The nave is lit by windows along its upper story. This is called a clear story. And at the opposite end of the nave from the atrium is the apse, right here, which is usually a semicircular projection. The apse is the building's symbolic core, where the altar is built on a raised platform. Sometimes there's also a transept, and transepts are horizontal wings that cross the nave in front of the apse. The transept was developed for early Christian churches that were on the site of pilgrimages, and this was to provide space for large numbers of people near the altar and its relics. Now, the basilica plan gets its name from basilicas built during the Roman period. So here is an example of the Basilica of Maxienus in Constantine, which you read about in your book. This is the ruins of it today, and here's what it once looked like. And you can see that we have this like strong central area, and then we have these side aisles, and you can get a sense of how similar it is to something like this, or maybe you can see it better here, or maybe even here it might be better. Now, most early churches have been rebuilt many times. This church is Santa Sabina in Rome, and it was constructed by Bishop Peter between 422 and 432. Now, this one actually appears fairly unaltered. And we can see here the early basic basilica design. We see the nave, so this is the nave, and then we see the side aisles over here. And so we can see that on the outside too. And then here's the side aisles, nave and side aisles, and there's that clear story. The exterior is typical of the time. So we would have kind of a plain looking, severe brick exterior. And this is going to contrast with the interior. So we can see this is beautiful marble on the inside. We'll see some more interesting contrast between the exterior and the interior in just a minute. But I just wanted to bring this in to show you an example of what a basilica church, an early basilica church, would look like. The other type of church is the central plan church. And it's based on it's a rounded dome structure. It's kind of like a rotunda, like the Pantheon. It was first used by Christians as tombs, baptistries, and shrines to martyrs. The dome, which is the central part here, is symbolic of the vault of heaven. The plan of the church centers around the dome. The central plan churches also have an atrium, a nares, and an apse, and a naos in the space containing the central dome, and they also have the sanctuary and the apse. So here we can see there's the apse over here. Here are the aisles, the nares, and the atrium. And maybe you can see it better in that other image as well. One of the earliest surviving central plan Christian buildings is the Mausoleum of Constantina. And Constantina is the daughter of Constantine. The tomb was built just outside of the walls of Rome around 350. It was consecrated as a church in 1256. The building consists of a tall rotunda with an encircling barrel-vaulted passageway under an ambulatory. In the interior, it has a double-ringed, here, maybe we can see this better, a double ring right here of columns. And here's the interior so that you can see it a little bit better. So here's that double ring of columns. Originally, the interior would have been covered in mosaics. There are some there today. And here's just another picture of the exterior, so you can see the shape of it. Okay, and I just bring that one in so again you have an example of what a central plan church looks like. And see the altar is actually in the center here. So this is great for relic churches because you can come and see the relic, kind of walk around it, and then be on your way. Rome's political importance dwindled, and northern Italian cities of Milan and Ravenna grew. The Roman Empire is split into two again at this point in 395 by Emperor Theodotus I, and the east and west are ruled by his sons. Eventually, Ravenna becomes the capital of the Western Empire. One of the earliest surviving Christian churches in Ravenna is a funerary chapel that was once attached to the church of the imperial palace. It was built between 425 and 426, and the chapel was constructed for the son of the emperor's half-sister. The chapel came to be known as the Mausoleum of Gallia Placidia because it's believed that Gallia Placidia and her family were buried there, at least at one point. Now what I really want to focus on is, okay, we have this very stark plain exterior, and then we go into the interior and we see beautiful mosaics like these. So the entire ceiling is going to be covered in this, which is meant to imitate the starry sky, but you can see that it's really florally based. So yes, it's meant to represent stars, but they use these flowers to represent them. Now this contrast between the stark exterior and this gorgeous interior represents the mundane world, our world, and then the transformation into the heavenly world. So when you walk into a church, you are meant to be transformed. You are meant to transcend into the next world. And in the interior of this mausoleum, among other things, we find an example of the Good Shepherd. This is the Good Shepherd lunette. This mosaic contains the classical elements such as illusionistic shading, suggesting a single light source. We have an imitation of landscape in rocks and foliage. We also have the concept of Christ as the shepherd, and here it has evolved. So when we first started seeing in early Christianity the depiction of the shepherd, it was much more like the Hermes depiction. He's wearing a shepherd's outfit and he's depicted with sheep. Very simple. He doesn't really look like a god at all. You literally could take this out of context and say, hey, maybe that's Hermes. Here we have Christ as a holy figure and as king and as a god. So Christ has evolved. He is now a young man with a golden halo wearing imperial robes. We can see that with the purple and the gold. And he is holding a long staff, but instead of being a shepherd's hook, it's actually a cross. We have a stylized landscape. It's kind of sort of like a stage setting almost. It's very shallow. But we also have this right here. This is actually a cliff face. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's actually like a cliff face that's meant to separate us, the worshipers, or the viewers, from the divine image. So that's definitely a difference between this intimate image, that you could really relate to and get involved with, and then this one is separated from us. So it's really depicting the supernatural realm. Like in sculpture, Christians used Roman forms in their art. Here are commemorative ivory diptychs, which is two carved panels hinged together. These originated with Roman politicians elected to the post of consul, who would send their friends and colleagues notices of events or maybe invitations or things like that, and they would scribe them in the interior of this, which was made of wax, and then it could be erased. Well, the Christians used the same material, only they would write they would write who they needed to pray for in the interior, and then they would bring it out in mass or at home, and they could read it and know who they needed to pray for. Here's just an example of a Roman priestess. So this is a Roman version, and then here is an example of Christian theme, where we have the tomb, and then over here we have the resurrection. Well, we actually have the "Don't touch me" scene. One of the cool details about this particular scene is, okay, we have the resurrection, and then we also actually have the story of Jesus resurrecting Lazarus from the dead here on these doors. So it's kind of a little interesting side note there. The theme, of course, is completely Christian.